First of all, I want to condemn what is happening in China to Africans and to Kenyans in particular. I do believe that it is a system-supported venture and that the Chinese government is keen on frustrating Africans, not just from Kenya, but the entire African continent on the basis of race. This is a violation, in my opinion, of fundamental human rights. Remember, every human being has a right to dignity, protection from torture, and to be treated in the most humane way. We do not need an express convention that bars China from doing this. All we need and call upon is for the Chinese government to respect customary international law. Some human rights have crystallized into customary international law, and China has no option but to respect. Kenya equally has options of dealing with the issue. Unfortunately, Kenya is so maiden to China that its response at best can be described as vague.
Okay, how about the impractical response given by the Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who said, "Ndege sio matatu"? Was that the adequate needed response from the Kenyan government?
I think that is the height of diplomatic ignorance and insensitivity from a person of Macharia's caliber. Macharia is a diplomat of no mean repute. It is unfortunate that such a statement came from him, not just as an individual, but as the principal secretary in charge of foreign affairs. Macharia should understand that the core responsibility of a state is to protect its citizens. Our embassy in China is established for two reasons. One, to protect Kenya's strategic interests in China, be they social, economical, or political. And secondly, that embassy is established to protect Kenyan nationals in China. So when Kenyan nationals in China or elsewhere get into trouble, the first recourse should be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And when we get blatantly arrogant statements like the one we are getting from the PS, then we say as a nation we have failed.
Okay, Wakili Lachena, when you look at the response by the government so far, and then later you hear the government saying that only those who have the capacity, the means to come back home will be facilitated. I mean, was that the needed scope, scale, and the speed of response by the Kenyan government for its mistreated, discriminated against citizens in China?
I think, first of all, we need to understand the situation is very unfortunate. And the response by the government, of course, because we expect Macharia is speaking on behalf of the government, we cannot talk about those who are capable. And because, first of all, capability has a lot of dimensions to look at it. Because they are there as citizens of Kenya. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the capability, we cannot fail to look at, first of all, if there is a flight or there are flights which may be able to transport those people, to fly those people from China to Kenya. How are you going to choose on who is capable and who is not? Are you going to take a flight with 5 people and come with empty seats because those others are not able to pay for the flight ticket or something? And just like my brother said here, it is the responsibility of the country, especially in such situations, to take care of its people. And that's one of the reasons why we were even receiving some support from WHO. Mm-hmm. Why are you given those supports? You are given as a state. Then it is you as a state to determine what is it that you think you may want to get assistance from those funds, all right? So, well, the response is by the cabinet secretary was actually unfortunate and quite misplaced. We would not expect the state to speak like that because he speaks on behalf of the state as a diplomat, isn't it? So, when you start talking of a flight not being a matatu, then what do you mean? Are you trying to tell us that you cannot be able to send for those people who are suffering there? Do you know even one individual is capable of, has a right to come back to the country, and you, as a state, you have a responsibility to bring that person, even if it is one person, even if it is one individual. You can go for them and bring them back to the country if wherever they are not comfortable, because we have already seen what is happening in Guangzhou, and it's quite unfortunate, and it's against, of course, international human rights. Okay. And I'm expecting UN will take further steps to see how to deal with that. Because, well, I may tell you, Ayub, and the Kenyans who are listening, whichever country you are in, you are entitled to the rights that are enjoyed by those citizens in that country. Just like my brother called them, we have those that we call, the human rights, the Charter on the International Human Rights has been ratified actually by all the states.
Okay.
So which China is part of it. And they have to treat those blacks, whether they are blacks, whether they are Africans, whether they are from whichever country, equally the way they are treating their citizens. It's unfortunate, but we also wait to see what the international community is going to do about it.
All
we
right.
have Chinese here in Kenya, all right?
Yes.
How do they expect us to treat them?
All right. Of course, they expect a sort of a mutually advantageous treatment of the citizens on either end. And we'll come to the UN aspect because there are concerns about China now taking over the important UN agencies and influencing decisions in New York, where the UN is headquartered, and the concerns, of course, raised by Americans in regard to how, and the UK, how the Chinese influence is now overriding the imbued system of liberalism in the United Nations system. But Wakili Lechena, what do you, Wakili, I mean, Eches, what do you think then is perhaps informing the silence by the government in regard to the certain degree of discrimination against Kenyans in the city of Guangzhou and largely in China?
I wish to answer that by quoting Chinua Achebe, my all-time favorite African writer, who says that those whose palm kernels were cracked by benevolent spirits should never forget to be humble. I think Kenyans' palm kernels have in the recent past been cracked by China. Kenya has borrowed so much from China. Kenya is indebted to China in all ways that we cannot face China and tell them this is wrong. We are beholden to China. China has become a benevolent spirit in Kenya. It cannot be questioned. We'd rather question our ancestral spirits, but forget about questioning China. Remember, when the US was questioning the human rights records in this country at one point, one minister, the late Newton Kulundu, stood up to Ranabaga, the then ambassador, and told him off. He told Ranabaga to his face that you cannot be violating fundamental human rights in the US and in the West and come to lecture Africans. Such are the people we need in this country. At this moment, somebody who can stand up to China and tell China off. But look at Macharia. Macharia is not speaking from nowhere. Macharia is speaking for the system. Macharia is speaking for government. That seems to be the government position. And Macharia was even saying that, oh, those Kenyans in China are misbehaving. They are perhaps not respecting the regulations put in place by China. China has its own penal laws. If anyone on the territory of China violates the penal laws of China, China has a responsibility of bringing that person to law. Not all Kenyans are immune from prosecution in China. We only have a few individuals, about 2 or 3, including the ambassador, who could be immune, but the rest can face the law.
Okay, and given that, then is it what the West has been raising in terms of the concerns about the China-Africa relations? We'll come to the aspect of the foreign policy and the Chinese influence large in the African continent and across the world, and the Beijing, Washington, UK, and Moscow rivalry on the African continent in what appears to be a 21st century scramble and partition for the continent. Then what does it say then about the concern raised by the West in regard to warning Kenya to not look at the East, owing to the begging bowl culture, of course, no rigorous financial processes, as is the case with the IMF and the World Bank? And is it because of the financial help that it offered the ruling Jubilee Party that perhaps is informing all this sort of response, which is half-baked from the government?
I want to agree with the West, but with some pinch of salt. One, this Africa-China relationship is coming to Kenyans and to Africa at a cost. And we are now seeing the cost, that they can violate, mistreat our people, and we cannot face them because they have fed us before, so they can beat us. And secondly, the West may not be such genuine. Remember, we once faced West, and then we had change of foreign policy to face East. So the West would want to take this situation to justify its condemnation of Africans facing East. That look here, at least we have a history with Africa. And indeed, the West has a history with Africa. They may have their misgivings, but we have had over 50 years of relationship with the West. But with the East, it is more of the government taking advantage of the East and its flexibility on borrowing and on on actually being fed. What has come from China has not reached Kenyans, has not reached Tanzanians or anyone on the continent. It goes to the hands of the system. You've talked about funding of the Jubilee. Not all Kenyans were in Jubilee, for example.
Okay.
There's just about 5 million of Kenyans who are in Jubilee, who may then be happy with that Chinese funding of the Jubilee. Where do you leave the rest of the country? And as I said before, it is such things as suspected funding of the Jubilee, the loans we've taken from China, that is making this country beholden to China.